Hello gamers, today we're doing an acespec tier list. While the acepecs are going to be mostly evaluated by how good they are right now, there are things that used to be really good that kind of fell off that I won't really be judging too harshly. The other thing to consider is that acepecs are not just evaluated by how good they are on their own, but also you can only play one, which means that using one denies access to all of the other ones. Before we get started, one other thing, currently 1% of my viewers are subscribed, which nothing wrong with not subscribing or anything, but 1%, it gets to a point, right? So I don't know. If you want to help me out, let's literally click the button, please. It would help me. It would be great. Now that said, there are 29 cards to go through here. Let's not hold things up any longer. The bottom tier here is for acepecs that I would consider to be unplayable, as in there's no reason to play these cards unless they are literally the only acepecs you have access to. And even then, I'd still feel terrible about playing them. If you're using these cards, please just reconsider, try anything else. So we're going to start off with what I think is the worst acespec in the game, Amulet of Hope. So Amulet of Hope, whose name kind of sounds like a Yu-Gi-Oh card, is a tool card from Searching Sparks that says if the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, search your deck for up to 3 cards and put them into your hand. Then shuffle your deck. So this card might not look that bad at a first glance. Adding any 3 cards from your deck to your hand is incredibly powerful, don't get me wrong. And going even further, the activation timing means that these cards will always be added at the end of your opponent's turn. In other words, you'll always have access to these 3 cards. But that's also the problem here, that activation timing. The Pokemon this card is attached to must be knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon. What does that mean? First, if your opponent can read this card, they can choose exactly when or if you get this effect. If they decide to just use Gusting, they can pick apart the rest of your board without you being able to use your amulet. If they use Jamming Tower and then take the knockout though, you've wasted your acespec. If they use Tool Scrapper, you've wasted your acespec. If they take the knockout with Adrenabrain, you've wasted your acespec. If they take the knockout with Curse Blast, you've wasted your acespec. If they take the knockout with Poison or Burn Damage, you've wasted your acespec. If they take the knockout with Technical Machine Devolution, you've wasted your acespec. If they take the knockout with Alakazam, you've wasted your acespec. If they place damage counters with Phantom Dive, take the knockout that way, you've wasted your acespec. There's a bajillion different ways to just get around this card. It's not good. Almost every top deck has a way to deny this search somehow, and basically every deck that's even remotely playable can at least delay the search. And that's the other thing, your opponent has to take the knockout. To use this effect, you're also giving your opponent a prize card, so you're helping them out as well. So there's really no situation in which this card helps you and only you, which puts it far below every other acespec. If I had to play this card, I guess I could maybe play Badoo, attach this to Badoo, and my opponent chooses, do they want to take the knockout and give me 3 cards, or do they standard item lock? And maybe that's something. Even then, it's still just so fragile. They just use Monkey Dory and I'm cooked, right? It's bad. It cuts you off from all the other better acepecs. It's just not good. I think this card is terrible. Let's move on. The next worst acespec, there's a lot of bad things down here. We have Survival Brace. Survival Brace is a tool card from Twilight Masquerade that says if the Pokemon this card is attached to has full HP and will be knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, it is not knocked out, and its remaining HP becomes 10. Then discard this card. Like Amulet, this card is a tool. It gets shut down by Jamming Tower and Tool Scrapper. I think Amulet is still worse because that one at least gives your opponent prize cards. This card will deny your opponent prize cards. It's a bit better, but this card is still very fragile, maybe even more fragile than Amulet. You see, the Pokemon this card is attached to needs to be at full HP, which means if I use Adrenabrain or anything to put even the slightest bit of damage on the Pokemon this card is attached to, it becomes useless. And also Alakazam still gets you as well, for whatever that's worth. What I will say is that this card seems to be kind of popular in Japan. There are quite a few City League deck lists that play this card. I'm not really sure why. Again, this card is not good. It's very fragile. It's just not ever worth doing. But because people do play it, I'll respect that and I'll put it above Amulet. Finally, completing the unholy trilogy of bad acespec tools, here's Deluxe Bomb. This is another tool from Stellar Crown. This says if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, put 12 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. If you place any damage counters in this way, discard this card. So this card is, again, susceptible to the same weaknesses as the other two. Jamming Tower, Tool Scrapper still completely wastes your acespec. That said, this one is a bit above the other ones because you can't completely ignore it as easily. Any damage from a regular attack will trigger this card, but the other two acepecs can be nullified by comboing a regular attack with Adrenabrain. This card cannot. If you attack once, this effect goes off, you place 12 damage. And 12 damage counters is still actually a pretty good impactful number here. There are times where I can imagine my opponent would not want to attack me because they don't want to take those 12 damage counters. That said, just like the other acespec tools that are down here, your opponent is the one who gets to choose whether this effect goes off. That's bad. There are ways to stop this effect from going off in the first place. That's bad. There's enough here for me to say this card is still not worth playing. It's just not as offensively terrible as the other two cards here. Lastly, there's one more card at the very top of Unplayable Tier. So this one is, I think, almost worth considering. Dangerous Laser. So Dangerous Laser is an item card from Shrouded Fable. This says, your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned and confused. One sentence. Such elegant simplicity. What a wonderful card. This card is a callback to the infamous Hypnotoxic Laser. Turns out, when you limit that card to one copy, make the effect weaker, and attach a huge opportunity cost, that card becomes a lot worse. For what it's worth, you can play this card like a donk deck. You can do the extra 20 damage from burn, maybe that'll make a difference sometime, but even then, I feel like you'd rather just use a different acespec to get your donk combo online in the first place. Overall, this card just isn't really impactful enough. If you want to stop your opponent from attacking, Confusion isn't as strong as just gusting in another Pokemon and trying to stall. If your goal is to do more damage, there are plenty of cards that increase your damage that are better, more consistent, and don't waste your acespec slot. Now, to be fair, like if this card was not an acespec, it would be obnoxious, right? It would be the most annoying thing ever. Like you have to limit this somehow. It's just a really bad acespec. With that, we are out of the unplayable tier. We're into D tier now. These are acespecs that are not exactly good, but have some kind of niche, so I don't really think they're unplayable. So at the very bottom of this tier, I've put Pokevital A. This is an item from Shrouded Fable. This card says heal 150 damage from one of your Pokemon. This card can't be put back into your hand or deck from the discard pile. This card is 2 lines of text. The second line of text is to prevent some kind of annoying infinite stall combo with this card. I think it's kind of funny that this is the acespec they decided couldn't be looped. To be clear, healing 150 with an item card is not bad at all. However, similar to Dangerous Laser, you're just not doing enough. Your opponent can take an O-code, then this card is useless. If you have an attacker that you don't think will get O-code and you want to keep that Pokemon alive for as long as possible, then you can consider this card. That's an option. And I mean, some people have played it. I see some Crustle deck lists that play this card, but like there's still that opportunity cost, right? Like as we keep going on here, you're going to see more and more cards. And you're going to see these are all the things you're cutting yourself off of if you choose Pokevital A. It becomes kind of obvious why a card like this just isn't worth it. That said, even though this card is outclassed in most situations, there's still a pretty solid, reasonable use case for this card. That's why I don't think it's fully unplayable, but it is pretty close. Moving on, now we have a Reboot Pod. A Reboot Pod is an item card from Temporal Forces that says attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to each of your future Pokemon. This card is pretty limited. First off, it only works in future decks. That's not good. I do actually like the concept of archetype specific acespecs, and it's a little bit disappointing that, you know, there's so few of them, but even though this card only works with future decks, this often isn't even the best acespec you could use in a future deck. The opportunity cost associated with these cards is again very expensive. Something like this, like sure it's good, but it's just not good enough. Future Pokemon have expensive attacks, so this card could be helpful for that, but you have cards like your Miraidon or your Electric Generator that helps you charge up those attacks more easily, right? And those cards are far more consistent because you can run 4 copies of them. Another kind of big problem here is that this card attaches from the discard pile, meaning you have to set up for it as well, and committing to a setup for a one-of item card is just not that reasonable. In most cases, it's a lot better to just use Miraidon or Electric Generator and just accelerate from the deck. So I won't call this card fully unplayable because it has results and it is good in future decks. It's just really not much better. Continuing on, the next card I'm putting here is Master Ball. So Master Ball is an item from Temporal Forces that says search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, and put it into your hand, shuffle your deck afterwards. Simple effect. It's crazy that a card this iconic in the games has been translated to be such a mediocre effect over here. For a little bit of time, this card did see play. It was used in Lugia decks back in the day because there just weren't better options, but once those better options came around, this card was dropped and nobody ever turned back to look at it. The primary issue here is that Ultra Ball exists, and sure, Ultra Ball has the cost of discarding 2 cards, but first off, you can run 4 of it, so it's way more consistent, and also, I mean, we have supporters that let you draw 7. Who cares that you're discarding 2 cards? It's not that big a deal. This card is still like good, like objectively it's good, but as an acespec and the opportunity cost of everything else suddenly makes it no longer worth it. So again, this card isn't unplayable because it always does something. It's just that something is kind of boring. Also, I think it's worth noting here, Master Ball is a reprint of an acespec from the Black and White era, and back then it didn't see any real usage either. They tried it twice and they're 0 for 2. I'll be honest, that's kind of sad. Moving on, here's a Megaton Blower. A Megaton Blower is an item from Surging Sparks that says discard all Pokemon tools and special energy from all your opponent's Pokemon and discard a stadium in play. So this card is good. This is like a really strong effect, right? You get to take out the stadium, all the tools, and all the special energy. That's actually crazy. Also, it beats Amulet of Hope, get owned. But the issue, once again, is the opportunity cost, right? If you're in a format in which everyone is using tons of tools, stadiums, and especially special energy, this card is really good. However, since this card is released, special energy has only become less relevant. Tools can be answered by Jamming Tower or Tool Scrapper, and stadiums can just be bumped by other stadiums. It's really just not worth using your acespec slot for an effect like this. Cards that are only useful in some matchups are fair. Those are tech cards. Your acespec probably shouldn't be a tech card. Again, there are just far more powerful effects you could be using, and the opportunity cost is just too much. I think there's an argument to be had this card could be put in the unplayable tier, but the reason this isn't here is because it has the potential potential to be good. And it actually has been good. Not in standard format, but in expanded. Right now, expanded is like a tier 0 format where Regidrago is the best thing ever and everything else is just kind of there. And in expanded, you're playing cards for the black and white era. So you have 15 years worth of extremely powerful tools and stadiums, and most importantly, special energy cards that you're attaching to your Pokemon and doing crazy things with. Megaton Blower is a very reliable, very consistent A-Spec because you know that your opponent is always going to be using those incredibly powerful cards, and this shuts them all off in one blow. Still, this is not about expanded, this is about standard, and in standard, this card is hardly usable, so D tier. If they release like a tier 0 deck revolving around special energy in the next few months, then I will admit I've been owned, and this will be really embarrassing to look back on, but right now, this is D tier, there's not much else to say. Next card on the list is Miracle Headset. A Miracle Headset is an item from Surging Sparks that says put 2 supporter cards from your discard pile into your hand. This effect might be familiar. Versus Seeker was an item card that places 1 supporter from your discard pile into your hand. This was always a very powerful effect, and currently we have Palpad, which shuffles 2 supporters into the deck. That also sees decent play. Headset is not terrible when you look at it that way, but this card is kind of in the same spot as many other ace decks we talked about here. This is a good effect. It's good. It just doesn't do enough. If I want to use a supporter many times, I'll just play more copies of it. If I want to use it more than 4 times, then Palpad is an option, and because I'm running so many copies of it, I'm favored to just draw into it off of Palpad. And that's worse than Miracle Headset, sure, but again, we're cutting off access to so many better ace deck cards that it just isn't really worth it for that slight consistency bump over just using Palpad and hoping to draw into it. I will say, I played this card in the Kangaskhan Fortress deck as a way to loop Ace Roll's Mischief, and that's really funny, and a deck like that doesn't actually have many good ace specs for it, so, you know, there is a niche here. This card is usable, so that's why I'm giving this D tier, but not great. Also, looking right now, Team Rocket's Honchkrow is a card coming out in Ascended Heroes that involves discarding supporter cards, and so people are playing this with that deck to increase your damage output. I can't imagine that actually being good, but that is another niche for this card. Maybe, just maybe, Miracle Headset has actually found its home. And finally, to close off D tier, we have Scramble Switch. This is another item from Surging Sparks. This says switch your active with one of your bench Pokemon. If you do, you may move any amount of energy from the Pokemon you move to your bench to the new active Pokemon. This A-Spec is a reprint, just like Master Ball. And just like Master Ball, this thing saw very little play because it was heavily outclassed. Back then they had computer search that was broken. We do not have that anymore. That said, this card still isn't good enough to compete with any of the new A-Specs either. The main thing about this card is that it's just weird. Like, this is a cool effect, but it's not really super often that you'd want to combo switch with a mass energy switch. The obvious like use case here is you switch your damage active attacker into a healthy bench attacker, you fully charge up right away and you get attacking, and that's really cool if you pull it off. It's just you don't really want to use your A-Spec on something like that. In fact, an effect like this is something worth building a whole deck around, honestly, but you can't build a deck around this card because it's a 1 of A-Spec. You can't use it that way. So it's a real shame. This card is really cool, but again, I'm putting it in D. Alright, so now we're moving on. We're in the C tier now. These are cards that aren't great, but I would consider them to be at least a step up from the stuff in D tier. And to start off the list, we have Treasure Tracker. This is an item card from Prismatic Evolutions that says search your deck for up to 5 Pokemon tool cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So is this an insane sneak to put all the way up in C tier? Maybe. But I really like Rotom, and this is probably the best A-Spec in Rotom, right? I mean, hear me out, right? The other A-Specs below this one don't actually have a deck where they're strictly the #1 best choice, right? There are other things worth considering here. But Treasure Tracker actually has a deck where it is the best premier option. I think that's enough for it to be in C tier. Searching 5 tools is a very specific effect. It's good in Rotom where you want tons of tools attached to your board. In any other deck, you're just playing Arbin or Townsort or whatever because you really don't need more than 1 at a time. And to be clear, if Rotom didn't exist, I'd probably put this like below Reboot Pod as like, oh, this card is kind of interesting, but it just like doesn't do enough. But because Rotom exists, I like it. Here it is at the very bottom of C tier. All right, moving on. The next card in C tier is Hyper Aroma. This is an item card from Twilight Masquerade that says search your deck for up to 3 stage 1 Pokemon, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. This card saw usage in Gardevoir back in the day because you had Refinement Curlia that was really strong and you wanted to search out a bunch of them at once. You could also nowadays when you play it in like Zoroark to search it out too. There was a time when you could place in Goldango to search out all your Goldangos. So this is a card that has seen competitive success in a lot of very good decks. So it's not as niche as the cards in D tier, but nobody is using this card anymore. Refinement Curlia is rotated out. Zoroark just has better options and Goldango also has better options at this point. So this card is basically seeing 0 play. That said, because it was good at some points, I'm still putting this in C tier. And for a similar reason, our next card is Awakening Drum. This is an item card from Temporal Forces that says draw a card for each of your ancient Pokemon in play. So this is a counterpart to Reboot Pod, but it's a lot better. First of all, getting Pokemon in play is a lot easier than just getting energy in the discard pile, and drawing cards is also really versatile. This card saw a lot of competitive success in all sorts of ancient decks back when it came out. Now, as time went on, people decided to move away from this card. They started opting towards other A-Spec options, but still, this card did see competitive play. It did see competitive success. If you're playing ancient Pokemon today, I think this card is still very worth considering. It's cool, but at the end of the day, because it doesn't really see play anymore and it's also just so specific, I think this card earns its spot in C tier. Moving on, now we have, okay, I do not like putting this card so low. I feel terrible doing it, but I think I have to. This is Grand Tree. Grand Tree is a stadium A-spec from Stellar Crown. This says once during each player's turn, that player may search their deck for a stage 1 Pokemon that evolves from one of their basic Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. If that Pokemon was evolved in this way, that player may search their deck for a stage 2 Pokemon that evolves from that Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. Then that player shuffles their deck. A bit wordy, but in short, you take a basic Pokemon and evolve it as much as possible using evolutions that are in your deck. I love this card. I love it so much, but it just isn't really good. So again, this is the first A-spec stadium. Being a stadium leads to a lot of issues. First of all, this card can be removed by your opponent playing any other stadium. That's a shame, but to be honest, this effect is good enough that using it once isn't that bad of a use of an A-spec. The larger issue here is that this card is reciprocal, meaning your opponent can use this effect too. This really sucks. This card on its own really isn't reliable enough for you to cut your rare candies, TM Evos, or whatever else you're using to evolve faster. But if you do use this card, you're giving your opponent 2 A-specs, which is like potentially really bad depending on what you're up against. On top of that, again, you have to evolve from the deck, which means that if you draw into your middle evolutions, you cannot actually use this card, and that also feels terrible. So for all these reasons, I think I can't really put this card any higher than C tier. And conveniently after this one, we have the other A-spec stadium, Neutralization Zone. Neutralization Zone is a stadium from Strategic Fable that says prevent all damage done to Pokemon that don't have a rule box by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. And this card cannot be put into your hand or deck from the discard pile. So this is a very powerful lockdown effect. Being able to blanket apply it to your entire board is kind of crazy. The issue again is that as a stadium, you can just remove this by playing any other stadium. So this lockdown is very temporary and sometimes it won't even last a full turn. In the current meta, there's also enough strat effects that you can just punch through without even having a stadium. It's just too unreliable, right? Most decks are playing stadiums and you can just effortlessly bump this card. You can play Copper Raja to stop that, but at that point, just play any other generic walling card. The only case in which this card is actually good is if you're playing a mill deck. You can mill out your opponent's other stadiums and then play Neutralization Zone at the end of the game to shut out your opponents. That said, this strategy doesn't really work that well because if your opponent knows what you're trying to do, they'll just hold their stadiums in their hand. And as long as they have a stadium in hand, they can counter the Neutralization Zone right away. This card is strong, sure, but it just isn't reliable enough to put anywhere higher than C tier. Alright, next in line, we have Energy Search Pro. This is an item from Searching Sparks that says search your deck for any number of basic energy cards of different types, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. There's not much to say about this card. For a while, this A-spec made Goldango decks work, and going into the World Championships, Goldango was one of the decks to beat specifically because they had this card. And of course, Goldango, being a deck that wants to have a large number of energy in hand, really likes a card like this. But now Goldango has moved on. They're playing Fighting Energies with Solrox and Lunatils and stuff. They don't care about this card anymore. And because of that, this card sees zero play. This card is basically unplayable if you're not using Goldango specifically. And I wouldn't be surprised if this card was specifically designed with Goldango in mind. If Goldango didn't exist, this card would easily be in D tier, but we're putting it up in C because Goldango was good and this card saw play in the top 8 of the World Championships. What else do you want me to do? Finally, one card left in C tier. This is a card that has a lot of potential, but I don't think it's put up the results to justify going any higher. Here's Max Rod. Max Rod is an item from Prismatic Evolutions that says put up to 5 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. This card is, once again, kind of strong. We haven't seen a strong deck that prefers to use this card though. It's the best A-spec in Venusaur, but Venusaur is not really seeing much high level use. Slowking sometimes use this card, but also that's Slowking, so yeah. One of the issues with Max Rod is that sure, it's the best card of its kind, but there are still a lot of cards that almost do what this card does, right? You have Night Stretcher, you have Lana's Aid, you have Super Rod, you have Sacred Dash, you have Energy Recycler. All these cards are, to be clear, worse than Max Rod, but they're also not A-specs. So I'm putting this card so high because I really do think it has potential. I would not be surprised if this sees real success soon, but because we haven't seen that yet, I can't really move it much higher than where it is right now. So now we're in B tier. This is where I'd say every single card here is good. You don't really need to cope at all to make these cards work, right? Like these are very playable cards that have decks where they are very good options in. Now at the very bottom of this tier, we have Brilliant Blender. This is another item card for Searching Sparks. This says search your deck for up to 5 cards and discard them, then shuffle your deck. Dumping 5 cards from your deck isn't nearly as strong here as it would be in something like Yu-Gi-Oh, but this is still a very good card. This card did see some usage in both Gardevoir and Ceruledge, but I'll admit it really isn't the best pick for either of those decks. I think this card is kind of on the same level as Max Rod of having really high potential but just hadn't seen much success. That said, Brilliant Blender has still seen an amount of success. People have still played this card and won with it far more than they have with Max Rod. That's why I'm putting this card just a tiny bit higher. Next we have Scoop Up Cyclone. This is another reprint A-spec. This is cool. This card is an item from Twilight Masquerade that says put one of your Pokemon and all attached cards into your hand. So this card is by far the best of the reprinted A-specs, and also it's so fun to use. Putting a Pokemon back to your hand like this is always really strong. This card is mainly used in Archelodon to recycle Assemble Alloy. Watch my video, but this is also also an option in Venusaur. It's also an option in Mega Kangaskhan. Any kind of deck where you want a fast way to just fully heal all of your damage, this is a real option. It's not as relevant as it used to be when Archaladon was meta, but I think this still has earned a spot in B tier. Next, Enriching Energy. So there are a couple of A-Spec energy cards, yet the first one is only making its appearance all the way up in B tier. That's pretty crazy. So this card is an energy card from Surging Sparks that says as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides colorless energy. But when you attach this card from your hand to a Pokemon, draw 4 cards. I might be a little bit biased here. This energy is only 1 colorless, which is bad, but that draw 4 is really nice. I played so many decks that used the Dunsparce with this card to recycle the energy to reattach it and draw a bajillion cards, and it's such a fun draw engine. I love it so much. I'll admit there's not too many crazy high placements, but there are still a number of day 2s with this card. This card is still good. There are decks this card fits in. It's just a very cool draw engine. I love this card a lot. I could not imagine playing this card any lower. I love drawing cards. I don't know what to tell you. I love drawing cards. You can't stop me. So moving on. Next up, Hero's Cape. Hero's Cape is a tool card from Temporal Forces. This card says the Pokemon this card is attached to gets 100 HP. So this card actually has a lot of results. Tons of people have played this card. A blanket plus 100 health is good in basically any deck you put this in. The thing is, there's not really many decks where this card is strictly the best choice, right? Any deck that Hero Cape is in play, there's also a couple of other A-Specs that are vying for that spot. In fact, I'll admit personally, I actually don't like this card very much. I think it's kind of not ideal to use, but it sees enough usage I have to respect it, and I'll admit I also have lost to this card before, so it'd be wrong of me to put it any lower than where it is right now. Moving on, we have yet another tool card, Maximum Belt. This is a tool from Temporal Forces that says attacks used by the Pokemon this card is attached to do 15 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon EX before applying weakness and resistance. This is simple. Plus 50 is huge. This card is a really great pick for all sorts of decks because it'll make your math way easier. You'll take tons of KOs you may not have been able to otherwise. Similar to Hero's Cape, this card is kind of like one of a few A-Specs that'll compete for a spot in different decks. And just like Hero's Cape, this is another generically good card in any deck that might normally fall short of big Okos. So again, solid B tier. Finally, at the very top of B tier, we have the final tool card of the list. Sparkling Crystal is a tool card from Stellar Crown. This card says, when the Terra Pokemon this card is attached to, it uses an attack. That attack costs 1 less energy. This is a really high placement for a kind of archetypal A-Spec, but this card is also really good. This is obviously far and away the best pick in Terra Box decks. It also was the best pick in Dragapult before Hilda came around. And the simple truth is that this card has a boatload of placements from just how much it does or did for all these different decks. I think the top of B tier is very well deserved here. I also want to talk for a little bit here. It's kind of a crazy coincidence, but the very bottom of the list and the top of B are both a trio of tool cards. And it's kind of funny it worked out that way, but I want to talk about why here. The tools in B tier are mostly more proactive, right? While the tools at the bottom rely on your opponent taking an action. The tools in B tier take advantage of the fact that they are tools. They have effects that can be continuously applied turn after turn after turn and have a lot of use because of that. The tools at the bottom though discard themselves or require the equipped Pokemon to be knocked out. So in short, I think that like these cards are just a really good example of how important it is to be proactive when playing. The tools at the bottom, while they're funny, I think are just generally very poorly designed cards that I don't think take advantage of the traits they've been given. Like, I'll be honest here, I think Survival Brace shouldn't even discard itself, right? Like, if you can consistently heal yourself back up to full and your opponent has no way to do even the slightest bit of chip, like, you just deserve to have an invincible Pokemon at that point. I don't care. I know that would be kind of annoying with Bidoof and Monkey Dory, but I just don't care. Like, that's an inconsistent combo, it's fragile, and it's kind of interesting. Like, can we not just, like, let that exist? I don't know. Anyway, here we are in A tier. These are cards that I think are exceptionally powerful, but currently don't see the level of usage as the cards in S tier. So let's start. Legacy Energy is a special energy from Twilight Masquerade that says, as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides every type of energy, but only provides 1 energy at a time. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, that player takes 1 fewer prize card. This effect of your Legacy Energy cannot be applied more than once per game. So making your opponent take less prize cards is obviously crazy. The fact that this card also counts as one of any energy type is great too. They really understood what they're doing here, right? This is a well-designed A-Spec. It applies 2 powerful effects, both of which aren't really seen this unrestricted. So this card is currently the best A-Spec in Ceruledge. It was also the best A-Spec in Lugia decks during the short time those 2 cards were allowed together. Also, in my opinion, I think this is the best A-Spec in Abomasnow for whatever that's worth. In general, this is just a very powerful effect. Maybe this is a bit high for a card that isn't really seeing much use in any of the best decks right now, but this card just reads so crazy that I don't really feel like I want to put this any lower. I'm moving on here. This is the final energy card of the list. Again, all the A-Spec energies are just so crazy. This is really good, but the final one here is Neo Upper Energy. This is an energy card from Temporal Forces that says, as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides colorless energy, but if this card is attached to a stage 2 Pokemon, this card provides every type of energy, but 2 at a time. So this card's name references Upper Energy. If you read the original Upper Energy, this is an insane upgrade. Neo Upper sees play as the primary A-Spec in Dragapult ever since Hilda was printed. Dragapult as a whole is one of the best decks in the game. I suppose this could kind of be seen as a bit of an overrating. It's good in Pult, but it's kind of only good in Pult right now, and if this card didn't exist, I'm sure Pult would just use Sparkling Crystal and be fine. But still, this is the best acespec and one of the best decks in the game. And again, 2 of any energy just on an attachment is crazy. This really propels Pult to a much higher level. This card is great. There's no other way to say it. Finally, at the very top of A tier, we have Unfair Stamp. This is an item card from Twilight Masquerade that said you can use this card only if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Each player shuffles their hand into their deck, you draw 5 and your opponent draws 2. So this card was grossly powerful. Then Festivity came around and hand destruction became a lot worse than it was, but still, this is another generically good acespec that sees tons of play to this day. Drawing a bunch of cards while destroying your opponent's hand without even using your supporter is obviously really strong. What can I say? This is definitely a well-deserved spot at the top of A tier. Finally, here we are in S rank. These are cards that are disgustingly good. They're basically without compared to any of the other acespecs I've listed so far. Let's just get started. The third best acespec is Precious Trolley. This is an item card from Searching Sparks that says search your deck for any number of basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. Like, just read the card, right? Like, just read it. Any number of basics. Nest Ball for 5. It doesn't matter how incredibly specific your combo is, this card probably sets it up single-handedly. It's just such a crazy effect. I do think it's really funny that one of the best ways to use this card is just to spam a bunch of Monkey Dory in one go. If you're playing Kangaskhan, you're probably using this card, but again, all sorts of decks, anything that's relying on basic Pokemon is using this card to get set up, and it's just so strong. This card is just totally on another level. In second place, what I think is the second best acespec is Prime Catcher. This is another item card from Temporal Forces. This says switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot. If you do, switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. There was a very long period of time in which this card was $20, and this card being in the first wave of acespecs had people convinced that Prime Catcher would be the only acespec worth playing. That ended up being untrue, but in the end, we got pretty dang close. Most of the lower tier cards that I mentioned simply not being worth it compared to other options. This was the other option. Unconditional gusting on an item is always crazy. People complain about boss's orders, here it is on an item card. Switching out your bench to the active is often going to be beneficial as well. Worst case scenario, just retreat and bring in your old attacker. There is a very strong case for this card being number 1. I put it in second place because I just think number 1 is just that powerful, but if you swap the 2 around, I probably wouldn't argue too much. If you've been playing the TCG at all recently, you probably know exactly what number 1 is, but here we are. Secret Box is an item card from Twilight Masquerade that says you can only use this card if you discard 3 other cards from your hand. Search your deck for an item, a tool, and a supporter, and a stadium, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Just get everything, your entire combo. Just get it all. I don't care. This card is $15 right now because it is the acespec if you don't know what you want. In fact, I bet a lot of other acespecs right now are only seeing play because this card is just so much more expensive. Maybe it's a little anticlimactic, but I really just don't know how else to emphasize how insane this card is, right? Like, you get your 4 cards, you play your stadium down, you use your item, you attach your tool, and then your supporter card is probably something that lets you draw 7 new cards, and now you have a new hand to work with. Like, honestly, you could put this card in its own tier above everything else. Like, I cannot understand how insane this card is, especially right now. But with that, that is every acespec. I think I'm correct, obviously. But there is a lot of stuff here. There are things you could switch around. If you disagree, just like let me know. I don't know. But there's like some important detail I missed. If it was like, oh, this card was actually really good in this specific deck and it should be in a higher place, you can tell me. I'm interested in hearing about it. But I think this tier list is pretty solid. I really don't see much room for moving things around here. That's about it though. So I don't know. See you later. Have a great day. Bye bye.